Senator Cormann.
Thank you, Mr. President. I thank senators for their contribution to this debate. In particular, I thank Senators Fielding, Xenophon and the Greens, represented by Senator Siewert, for their expressions of support for the bill that we've put forward today. Now, I mean, the Minister, talking about time wasting, the Minister has just spent 20 minutes not talking about this bill, but actually talking about the merits or otherwise, in his view, of the disallowance motion. I will leave my comments, my detailed comments, on why we do not support the government's savage cut to Medicare rebates for cataract surgery for my remarks when we discuss the disallowance motion. But let me just remind the Senate what this legislation is all about. This legislation is to ensure that if an item in a table of medical services prescribed in accordance with subsection 1 is disallowed under section 42 of the Legislative Instruments Act 2003, the corresponding item, if any, in the previous regulations is taken to apply in place of the disallowed item from the time of disallowance. And it is proposed to take effect as of 26 October 2009, which is of course the day when the government finally tabled the relevant regulations. Now, the minister's argument, if the minister's argument were to stand, if the Senate were not allowed to go down this path in terms of moving that disallowance, then what the minister is really saying is that the government can do anything to the Medicare benefit schedule. The government could cut them by 80%. The government could delete 1,000 items. The government could do all sorts of things. And if the government's argument were to stand, then really what the government is saying that the only decision the government has got when faced with the only decision the Senate has got when faced with a proposition by the government to dramatically reduce a rebate like this is whether we want to delete or not delete. When clearly the intentions of the Senate is to disallow the government's move to drastically reduce the cataract surgery Medicare rebate. If the government's argument were to stand, then essentially the Senate would not be able to do anything in relation to whatever the government does to the Medicare benefit schedule. And I don't think that that is a satisfactory situation for the Senate to be in. And given the legal advice and given the advice that the Minister has finally released this morning and given the understanding that we had, which is why we prepared these amendments initially to the Health Insurance Act through the Health Insurance Amendment Compliance Bill and subsequently through this private members' bill. Given that the situation appears to be flawed in the legislation as it currently stands, it is very clear that the Health Insurance Act 1973 desperately needs to be amended. Desperately needs to be amended, because it can't possibly be that the Senate should only be left in a position where the only decision we can make is whether to delete or not delete an item when in fact what we clearly want to do is stop the government from reducing by 50% rebate for a life-changing surgery. Now, the Minister mentioned in his second reading contribution the commitments made by the Shadow Treasurer around budget time. Now, that was at a time when we thought we could believe what Nicola Roxon is telling us about the impact of the various budget measures. But I mean, the sad thing is, when you started scratching the surface, when you actually realised that there'd be no consultation, that they clearly hadn't thought it through, that there were going to be drastic consequences for thousands and thousands of patients across Australia, in particular patients in regional Australia, we clearly had to reconsider. And we announced that in a very upfront fashion, together with Senators Xenophon and Fielding, on the 8th of September 2009. So the government has known about this for more than 7 weeks. But what a cheek for the government to come and lecture us about commitments. Remember, this is the government which went to the last election promising the world in the health portfolio. They were going to fix public hospitals. Labour had a plan to fix public hospitals by the middle of 2009. What have we had? A 20-month review, the National Health and Hospital Reform Commission review, which is now being followed by a review in the review and by a whole series of photo opportunities for the Prime Minister and the Minister for Health and Ageing. Private health insurance. The Prime Minister gave the most solemn commitment to 11 million Australians who take additional responsibility for their own healthcare needs, that his government would retain the existing private health insurance rebates. And everybody knows what's happened. The most brazen, broken promise close in the history of the Commonwealth. I mean, everybody knows that Labor doesn't like private health. Everybody knows that the ideological crusade against private health is part of Labor's DNA. So everybody was suspicious, understandably suspicious, in the lead-up to the last election as to what the government's or what a Labor, Federal Parliamentary Labor Party's true intentions would be if indeed they won government. And of course we've got it here to see. I mean, this government has got absolutely no credibility when they try to lecture us about keeping commitments, because in the health portfolio we had broken promise after broken promise after broken promise. And of course, like the Minister, the Prime Minister, the government as a whole has not been able to make any tough decision yet. Whenever they've got to make a tough decision, all they do is set up another review, another committee, another agency, another inquiry, and if in doubt, set up a review into those same reviews and have another consultation round and a few photo opportunities. So, I mean, I apologise for sort of getting a bit agitated about this. I apologise to the Senate. However, the cheek of the government to come in here and try and lecture us about commitments made. Very clearly, our decision to reject the 50% reduction in the Medicare rebates for cataract surgery proposed by the government is based on the best interest of patients. This is a life-changing surgery. It is a very cost-effective preventive health measure. It is a measure that helps prevent falls, that helps prevent fractures, that helps prevent mental stress, which helps prevent social isolation. It has a serious positive effect on the quality of life of our senior Australians. Now, the government is proposing to unilaterally, without any, based on no evidence at all, and I go into this in a bit more detail when we discuss the disallowance motion. But I mean, the minister's been out there saying, oh, well, this surgery now takes a period of time, it's about 15 minutes. I asked the question in Senate estimates. How many procedures, out of the 187,000 procedures that you fund every year, how many of them take 15 minutes? How many take 15 to 20 minutes? How many take 20 to 25 minutes? How many take 25 to 30 minutes? You know what? The government was not able to provide an answer. And the reason they were not able to provide an answer is because the government does not collect that data. They have got no idea. That is the answer we got from the government, that through the Medicare benefit schedule, the government does not collect any data on how long this surgery takes. But I tell you what we did have. We had an AMA survey of 334 ophthalmologists who responded as to how long their average cataract surgery would take. 70% of them indicated it takes between 25 and 40 minutes. Now, I thought that perhaps the government is going to be, very keen to put the finger into some flaws. Perhaps the government is going to explain to me why the AMA survey doesn't stack up. I said to them, are you aware of the AMA survey of ophthalmologists, which finds that 70% of ophthalmologists take between 25 and 40 minutes for that particular procedure? The official at the table, the senior official responsible for the Medicare benefit schedule, the same official who also told us, mind you, that if the Senate were to disallow this particular item, it would revert back to the old rebate, but never mind. That official told us that when I asked her, do you want to comment on this particular AMA survey, she said no. Now, I would have thought that if the government, here you've got the minister again running a political argument out there to say, oh, well, This process is much shorter now, it's cheaper, it's simpler. But like when you actually ask for some evidence, the government says we have none. The government says we have none. Now, as I say, we're going to go into, I'm proposing to go into this in some more detail in the context of the debate on the disallowance. However, in relation to this bill, this is a very carefully considered, responsible course of action undertaken by the opposition, Senators Fielding and Xenophon, and gratefully now also with the support of the Greens in the Senate. And this will ensure that if future items are disallowed by the Senate, then we will revert back to the rebate that was in place immediately prior to the time of the disallowance. Now, Mr. Acting Deputy President, I won't hold up the Senate for the full time. I think it is very clear what the intentions are of this, with this legislation. I again thank all senators for their contribution to the debate, and I commend the bill to the Senate.